All right. Uh, I don't know how to start this video off, but I will just say, welcome back. It's been a while. Specifically, I'm not gonna go to specifically at all, but it's been about. I want to say it's been about 7. No, it's been longer than that. It's been about 8 months, I guess. Yeah, it's been about 8 months. But don't worry, don't you worry, because ladies and gentlemen, I am back. I don't know if I'm back consistently, but I'm going to try to be as consistent as I can, and we're going to see how it goes. But today, because I'm back, I decided to give you guys a little taste, or I guess I want to basically do a video where I do a tier list. Now, you've probably seen thousands of these, but there's only a good handful of Resident Evil tier lists. If you don't know what the Resident Evil franchise is or what Resident Evil is, it's a zombie survival horror genre game and franchise that has been around since '96. Um, I think ever since March 26th of 1996 is when Resident Evil 1 was first released, and when that happened, it changed gaming. Like it completely, like the genre survival horror was then created with Resident Evil, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. But today, and I'm sorry if I sound a bit weird or something. I don't know. I'm still working out the audio quality and shit. But today, we are going to be doing a Resident Evil tier list. And if you are a fan of the series, let me know in the comments. If you let me know in the comments. I guess what should you answer? I guess in the comments below, let me know what your favorite Resident Evil is, because it definitely changes for some people. Like, I know a lot of people and a majority of people will say that Resident Evil 4 is their favorite, but other there are those other fans that will say Resident Evil 2 remake is better or Resident Evil 1 remake is better. I don't know. For me personally, though, well, we'll get into it. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into the video. We're starting things off strong with Resident Evil 1, the original, the classic. It started it all. You can't rank it badly, right? Resident Evil 1 is definitely not dated well, but I will say Resident Evil 1 is still a great game. It's still got that scare factor, it makes you jump sometimes, and although I will say Resident Evil 1 remake is better in my opinion, I think Resident Evil 1 is a solid Resident Evil game, and I think that if you haven't played this game, I highly recommend playing it, because I think what makes this game what it is the fixed camera angle, because at the time, obviously, over the shoulder kind of games, third person over the shoulder games didn't exist at all. So basically with this game, obviously for the first literally up until Resident Evil 4, every Resident Evil was a fixed camera angle game, which means basically every time you move into a new room that the game has to generate, it basically switches angles. And you know what I mean, basically. If you know, you know. But Resident Evil 1, I'm going to have to say, I'm going to give it an A tier. I think that the game has its flaws, obviously. It's very old, and it's obviously got some issues with the game, but it started it all, man, and honestly, you can't really rank it badly. So Resident Evil 1, it goes into A tier. Moving on, we have Resident Evil 2. This is one of my favorites. It is a classic, a amazing game. It stepped up. I think that if you've played Resident Evil 2, you'd probably agree with me that Resident Evil 2 is 10 times better than Resident Evil 1. But that is not to say it is a perfect game, because it's not. Obviously, it's still got its flaws with it being released in '98. But I think this game has many, and I mean many, um, things that make this game amazing. The atmosphere. I think that the change with character, because in the original game you play as Chris or Jill. You get to choose, and in this game you get to choose as well, kind of, with Leon or Claire. Now, what makes this one interesting is there's two scenarios. That's what they're called. Scenario A and Scenario B. Scenario A is Claire. You play as Claire, and Scenario B is Leon. But what I love about the scenarios is that they're different. They're absolutely different. There are changes within the game depending on which scenario that you play. So, in my opinion, this game 10 times better than Resident Evil 1. It's getting an S tier. It's getting an S tier because it's such a good game. So, Resident Evil 2 gets an S tier. Moving on, we have Resident Evil 3. Now, I don't mind this game, but it's not one of my favorites. I'll say that. Out of the original 3 on the PlayStation, this is my least favorite, and it's not a bad game. Let me just say that real quick. It's not a bad game because I think that Resident Evil 3 has many qualities that are good, but in my opinion, I think that the game, what makes it not as good as Resident Evil 1 and 2 is the scary aspect. There's no real horror to the game, in my opinion. I don't really find this game scary. I think it was definitely a step down in scariness and horror. And I do think, in my opinion, I mean, I will say, I think Nemesis kind of carries this game very hard. Although the ending music, the song that plays in the credits, absolute top tier, probably the best an ending song ever in history of gaming. But the game is good. It's great. It's a great game. Don't get me wrong. It's a great game. But I'm going to put it in A tier, below Resident Evil 1. And that's where I'm going to leave it. But we move on to Code Veronica. I'm not going to lie. I didn't really like... Here's the thing. Over time, I've kind of gotten over the game. But I'm going to be honest. The camera angles. I mean, what makes this game Resident Evil? I think that camera angles and also the puzzles that you have to solve within the game, I think it has those Resident Evil elements to it. But what I think makes this game fall down for me, and not, because I know a majority of people would put this in A tier, I'm going to put it in B, because I think what makes this not in A tier is probably, I would say, the story of this game. I'm not really a huge fan of the story of this game, and also Steve, who is a side character in this game that you meet pretty much at the beginning of the game on this island that you've been captured and brought to this prison island. I think he is the most one of the most annoying characters ever in Resident Evil. He's just an absolute rat, and I despise him, to say the least. But Code Veronica is a solid game. I would love to see a remake of this game. I think everyone who is a Resident Evil fan would love to see a Code Veronica remake, because we haven't seen one yet. And I think if we get one, that this game, I think that the remake of Code Veronica could possibly be one of the best Resident Evils of all time. But that's a question that has not yet been answered, because I don't know if we're ever going to get a Code Veronica remake officially by Capcom. Maybe if we ask it. I mean, we've been asking for a long time, so let's see it, Capcom. I want a Resident Evil Code Veronica remake, so it's getting a B tier. Moving on. Resident Evil 1 remake. Remake, remastered, whatever you want to say. In my eyes, it's a remake. Resident Evil 1 remake is S tier. And in fact, I'm going to add a tier. I'm going to add a tier above. I will do it white, because why not? S+. This truly is an S+ material game. Resident Evil 1 remake, I mean, what it did is it amplified. I mean, it amplified the original so much, not only by graphics, but it also added content. The added content with Resident Evil 1 Remake made it better, and also adding new enemies such as the Crimson Heads, which are, although quite annoying, they are a cool and unique enemy that are in the game. And honestly, this game I love because it's got so much to do, and it really amplified the original so like huge. And I love this game. It's got great atmosphere, probably the best atmosphere in any Resident Evil game. It's a phenomenal game. It's got to be an S plus, right? I think it has to be. There's gonna be a couple games in the S plus, and you'll see what those are. But I think Resident Evil 1 Remake absolutely deserves an S plus material. It deserves an S plus, absolutely. So we're gonna end it at that. Move on to Resident Evil 0. I'm gonna be honest. I'm not a fan of this game. I don't really like Resident Evil 0. And I'm gonna explain why first, and then I'll rank it. Resident Evil 1 or Resident Evil 0. What makes this game not good, in my opinion, it's gotta be the changes in gameplay. The gameplay changes that they made with Resident Evil 0 absolutely tortured this game. I mean, it tortured it. I'm talking the new co-op kind of system where you have to swap between characters. That system, man, I mean, although unique, it's a very unique system, and it's cool. When it's executed, it doesn't really go to plan, and it's not well, in my opinion. Resident Evil Zero's changes to not add when they didn't add a item box so you can store your things in absolutely changed the game, and not in a good way, because as you're kind of picking all these items up, you kind of have to figure out along the way, what are you going to do with these things? Are you going to use them up? Are you going to save them for later? If you are going to save them for later, you kind of have to drop them onto the ground somewhere and come back for them, because as you go through this game and solving puzzles and doing everything with the two characters, playing both of them at the same exact time, it is super stressful. And especially when one character is kind of just off somewhere, you kind of just put him somewhere else, and then the other character is somewhere solving a different puzzle, and then all of a sudden you kind of just get you get this kind of sequence where the other character that you're not controlling gets killed by an enemy because you're not quick enough to swap the characters. I mean, that's kind of the game's fault, because it's super, like, swapping between characters is kind of slow, and especially if the screen kind of tells you, alerts you that the other character is getting attacked. It's at that point, it's too late. It's too late at that point for you to save that character, and you have to go back to your original save point and do that all over again. It's super stressful, and I'm not a huge fan of this game. I will say, though, the train sequence with the train in the beginning of the game is a cool sequence. I love that part. But unfortunately, after that, the story and the gameplay and puzzle solving kind of gets repetitive, and it gets super stressful along the way. So I'm going to put Resident Evil 0 at C tier. And now we have, in my opinion, the greatest video game of all time, Resident Evil 4, S+. Absolutely. This game is my favorite video game of all time. I have a poster of it on my wall. I love this game. It's something else. Like, this is what Resident Evil 4 changed Resident Evil so much. It also changed the genre of not only survival horror, but it changed really just the gaming genre itself with third-person shooters and horror games. It changed that system to where it changed it basically. All I gotta say it's changed survival horror and really horror games in general. Dead Space kind of follows along with that, kind of help kind of going along with that third person over the shoulder horror game, and it copied it from Resident Evil 4. The game has got amazing story, amazing characters, replay value. That's the thing with all these Resident Evil games, and especially the ones up top, is they have replay value, and Resident Evil 4 is no exception. It has that replay value, and you can play the game over and over and over again, and it never gets old. The game has interesting mechanics. It's got unique puzzles, and really Resident Evil, this is the first Resident Evil to basically kind of have you not, instead of kind of you just going around and going back and forth between areas solving puzzles, it just kind of changed that with kind of just a straight line, so you have Resident Evil 1, 2, 3, whatever, where they kind of send you off and go, you do you. But then you have Resident Evil 4 over here, kind of just showing you the path, the right path, and you have to follow that path. That's kind of what Resident Evil 4 is. But the game, it was ahead of its time, man. It was ahead of its time. I absolutely love and adore this game, and I cannot wait for the remake to come out. And I'm definitely going to be giving my review on this channel when I play it. It's going to be a fucking blast. So, moving on. Resident Evil 5. Here's what I'll say about this game. Amazing co-op game. I will say it's probably one of the best, if not the best, co-op game there is. It's fun. It's also got great mechanics, great kind of utilize, you have to utilize your ammo and your healing very precisely, and that's fun. I enjoy that. But what makes this game fall down not quite a bit, but here's what I'll say. It's an A tier. It's an A tier. Because yes, the game it's really fun co-op. However, and here's the but. The game solo absolutely is super fucking miserable. The game, what happens is the AI of Sheva really messes with you. The AI, when you give her ammo, wastes the ammo so quickly that you have to give her more ammo. But at that point, you're already pissed off with her, so you kind of just don't really care at that point. And you're kind of it's kind of like Resident Evil 4. You're going in solo. And what makes the solo experience so miserable that it's just like not fun at that point. I mean, there are fun things to solo, but it's more stressful than anything, because having to just deal with Sheva's horrible AI, it's so bad, and I don't enjoy playing it solo. But, and as I said, this game co-op is such a blast, and I highly recommend playing it if you haven't played co-op. It is such a blast to play with a friend or somebody. Like, it is far better than solo. So I'm giving Resident Evil 5 an A tier. Next up, Resident Evil Revelations 1. I'm not gonna lie, I want to see Revelations 3. Now, it's not to say these games are amazing. They're not. They're good, but they're not amazing. I'm going to put Rev 1 in B tier. I think it's a solid B. I think that it was interesting enemies, very unique enemies, and also a unique story. I love the story in this game, and Revelations 2 as well. But, the return of Jill Valentine, I think probably the first time, I think probably the first time in a while at least that she had been in a side project, a side game. So, hey, that's something. But Revelations 1 is good. It's a very good game. I think it does have some flaws to it, of course. Obviously, it doesn't have that main Resident Evil kind of kind of style, solve puzzles, go here, do this, blah blah blah. It was kind of, again, it's kind of like, doing a straight line. So, although very unique and very good, it's not amazing. So I'm put it in B tier. And this is where I might get some flack. Resident Evil 6 is not a bad game. And hear me out here. Hear me out. Resident Evil 6 is really good without the Resident Evil title. If you remove the Resident Evil title, this is a very good action game. It's a super good action game. It's got great enemies and everything like that. It's got great level design. Unfortunately, when you add the Resident Evil title on top of it, it just butchers the Resident Evil time. It really butchers the franchise itself. Not only because it doesn't have good level design. The level design is terrible. It does not have any, interesting enemies at least, but I think that again the AI, it just messes with you. And on top of that, I think what really breaks this game down to I'm gonna be honest, bottom of the B tier. It comes down to it's not Resident Evil at all. It is not Resident Evil. It's way too much action. It's got no real horror elements, so there's that. But I think Resident Evil 6 has got great, and I mean a great action. It's a great action game. But when you add Resident Evil onto it, it just doesn't go well. So I'm going to put it in B tier, the bottom of B. And I might get some flack for that because I know people do not like 6. I know people put it in C or D or even F. But for me, I think it's a solid game. And also content-wise, there's so much content for this game. You got Leon's story. You've got Jake and Sherry's story. You have Ada's, and then you've got Chris and Pierce's story. So I think it's got a lot of content. Maybe not amazing content, but at least decent content, So I'm going to put it in B. And speaking of good, we're going to put Revelations 2 in B tier as well. I'm going to put this... Ooh, I'm trying to think here. I'm going to put it above Rev 1 because I see what people are saying when they think Rev 1 is better, this and that. I like Rev 2 better. I think it's because of the characters, Claire is just that MVP, She's just the top dog girl, She's the girl, man. She has got to be one of the best characters in the franchise. We haven't seen her in a while, though. I mean, if you want to count Revelations 2, then go ahead. But in my eyes, I don't count Revelations 2 as part of the main storyline. So what I would say is we need Claire back. I think we need to see Claire come back. She's older now. We haven't seen her since, I guess, Code Veronica. But if you want to talk, kind of mainline, it's been since Resident Evil 2. So it's been since 98. And obviously the remake, but that doesn't really count. So it's still 98. I want to see Claire come back. She would be a great part to the story, and honestly, I think Leon and Claire should meet back up, see what they're up to, blah blah blah. Obviously, in Code Veronica, you tell Leon where you're at, whatever, blah blah blah. But it's Code Veronica, I don't really like it. So yeah, but Revelations still put in B tier. Moving on, Resident Evil 7. I think hear me out, and I think most people would agree. Without Resident Evil 7, I don't know where the fuck this franchise would be without Resident Evil 7. Resident Evil 7, quite literally, number one, it saved Capcom's kind of, what and who they are and what they are. It saved Capcom. And number two, it saved the Resident Evil franchise. It fucking, if without this game, man, I don't know where we would be at with the Resident Evil storyline, franchise, whatever. I don't know where we'd be. if this game didn't exist. This game was so big in 2017 when it launched. You saw every YouTuber playing it. You saw every Resident Evil fan playing it. Everybody was playing Resident Evil 7. And even if you didn't play it on launch, you played it after launch probably. You probably played it after the game came out, maybe years out down the line, or maybe even months down the line after it came out. So the game saved the franchise. It brought back what Resident Evil was. Horror. It was a horror franchise. It has horror elements. Not only that, but it has the puzzle solving to it, where you have to go from this area to this area to kind of solve this puzzle. And it banged, man. I mean, it sold millions. It sold millions, man. And honestly, I think if you don't like Resident Evil 7, you really just don't like survival horror. So I'm going to put Resident Evil 7 at S tier. S tier material, man. And we're moving on to Resident Evil 2 Remake. I'm going to kind of rush this because it's a long video right now, but Resident Evil 2 Remake is one of the best remakes of any game, in my opinion. I'm going to put Resident Evil 2 Remake at S+. It's my top 3 favorite games of all... I mean, right here. This is my top 3 favorite games of all time. S+. Resident Evil 4 is number 1. Resident Evil 1 Remake is number 2. And Resident Evil 2 Remake is number 3. The game remade what was a classic horror experience and elevated it. I mean, it made it more scary. It made it more... made the atmosphere way more pop even more. It changed the game. It changed Resident Evil 2 a lot. And it's like a completely different game. But here's what I'll say. It's not a perfect game. Here's why. Resident Evil 2 Remake's scenarios, or as they're called, runs in this game, run A, run B, the game scenarios in Remake are not as good, in my opinion. They're like Resident Evil 2 Remake scenarios are the exact same, no matter who you play, Claire or Leon, exact same. They're just, I think, what makes scenario B, different is how short it is. It's very short. It's not as long as you would play the A scenario. So, although an amazing game, I think what they could have improved on is the scenario changes. I think they could have changed what the scenarios, how the scenarios were, and, did it like Resident Evil 2, the original did. So, it's still amazing. It's still an amazing game, but I gotta give it a downgrade. I gotta give it's lost some points because the scenarios are quite literally the same. But, well, whatever. Moving on. Resident Evil 3 Remake. Oh, God. It's not a bad game. It's a terrible remake. That's always how I describe Resident Evil 3 Remake, is that it's not a bad game. It's really not. It's a good game, in fact. But unfortunately, it is the worst remake I have ever played in any video game, ever. Like, the remake... dude, they butchered this remake so badly. Like, not only did they cut a shit ton of content, so that means they cut the clock tower, they cut so many bosses, enemies, areas of the game. They cut a lot. And also, on top of that, Nemesis, he's not as scary or even as utilized as much in the remake. I would think with the remake they would utilize him way more than the original, but they just simply didn't. And when they did utilize him, it was just in the worst way possible. They just absolutely butchered this game. And I think that if M2, which is the development company that made Resident Evil 3 Remake, if M2 didn't make Resident Evil 3 Remake, and if the people who made Resident Evil 2 Remake made it, I think we would have probably an S tier, maybe even an S plus tier remake. But unfortunately, it's down to an A because, again, great game, terrible remake. Moving on. Resident Evil Village. I'm going to be honest. I like Resident Evil Village more than Resident Evil 7. And I think it's because of Ethan. Ethan in Resident Evil 7 has like no personality at all. He has like zero personality. He is just like he's like Leon in Resident Evil 2 remake. But obviously less badass. I think that the Resident Evil I think Resident Evil 8 it's a really good game. Like a very, very good game. But here's what I'll say. I think the game could have improved I think maybe it's me being bad at the game. I don't know. In the beginning, the village section where you fight off a horde of Lycans, basically like Resident Evil 4, the beginning of the village. The exact same thing, but Resident Evil Village, what makes it different is when I played it on hardcore, my first playthrough. The game, the village section where you're fighting off all these Lycans and they're coming at you, maybe it's me being maybe ass at the game, but I found it so difficult. It had this sour taste in my mouth once I finished that. I was like, I don't know if I like that. And then after that, though, it just kept building and building and building, and it just kept doing that all the way to the end of the game. But that beginning of the game, man, with that village section, fighting off all those Lycans, it left a sour taste in my mouth, and I wasn't really excited. I was kind of thinking Resident Evil Village would be like down to an A tier, but luckily that didn't happen. The roller coaster, kept going up and up and up and up and up, and kept doing that till the end of the game. And that's why I love Resident Evil Village more than 7, is because it kept building. And what makes 7 worse, in my opinion, is the end of the game when you're playing as Mia. Mia's section is, number one, really short, but number two, it's boring, in my opinion. I don't find the area very amusing and interesting. I think that it could have improved, So I'm going to put Resident Evil Village at S tier, above Resident Evil 7. We're down to the last two. I'm not going to talk much about these two, really, because number one, this video is very long, but number two, there's nothing really to say about these games. Although I will say I do think Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City is underrated, and it's very much overlooked. I'm going to put it in C tier. But I'm putting Resident Evil The Dark Side Chronicles in F. This game, man, I'm not going to talk about it much. It is so bad. It's really bad. The game was on the Wii, and when I played it for the first time, I was really, thinking, what the hell is this? It's basically Resident Evil Dark Side Chronicles. It's whenever you go into an arcade, and you have those, those guns, set up for you in those booths with the game inside. That's exactly what Resident Evil The Dark Side Chronicles is. And the camera's moving everywhere, and it's just like, oh my god, I can't deal with it. So, I'm not going to say much else, but The Dark Side Chronicles deserves an F tier. Absolutely. And I think that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I think we're done here. If you guys enjoyed this video, please smash the like button and subscribe to the channel. That would be amazing. Let me know in the comments. Do you agree with my list, or do you not agree? I know people are not going to agree with my list, but let me know in the comments. What is your favorite Resident Evil game? Because honestly, it changes for everyone. For me, it's Resident Evil 4, favorite video game of all time, and the best Resident Evil game of all time. And yeah, anyways, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.